It's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday, presented, of course, by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years, bunch of podcasts. We've got Professor Greg Cosell from NFL Films University in the house, which is very exciting. We will have a spread the word winner via social media, just somebody that likes facebook.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Pretty easy to win this week. They'll be announced tomorrow. Get one of these awesome press passes, maybe even the one I get tonight from the Texans and the Eagles. Sponsor confirmation, email winner, of course, someone that takes advantage of any of these amazing sponsors like Game Time app or Sling or Labatt or Masterworks. You get a little something. And you definitely get your email read and responded to on the show. And then the YouTube shout out, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Love it. Love new subscribers. Love new commenters. Love new patrons. Dan Merchant, patreon.com/RT Media. At the Tuckheads level, you get the even money bets in black and white, the Friday picks, the press box food grades, the power rankings, and you get to be a part of our thriving community on the private Slack channel. Welcome, Dan, to the family. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
You know him. You love him. Him is Greg Cosell. He joins us every Thursday at this time. Greg had maybe the most eventful trade deadline I can remember in a while. And so I wanted to ask you about some of the more notable players that switch teams, what you think of them, and what you think of them with their new teams. So, of course, Greg from NFL Films, at Greg Cosell on Twitter. Let's start with Bradley Chubb, who actually just signed a new contract for big money, $120 million, $119 actually, over the next 5 years in Miami after being traded from the Denver Broncos. Your thoughts on Chubb in general and in particular how he fits in Miami, Greg?
Yeah, I think Miami made a couple of good moves, actually. You know, Chubb's a good player. He's an edge pass rusher. You never have enough of those guys. We talked about that with Robert Quinn. You never have enough edge pass rushers in this league. He's a good player. So he now is added to a defense that has a lot of different pieces to it. I think they've struggled in the secondary this year with injuries, but he's a good pass rusher. And they do a lot of things up front. They like to be very, very aggressive with how they play. And I think they've not been able to do that quite as much because of the issues in the secondary. But Chubb will certainly add pass rush. If I could, I think that the Jeff Wilson trade, which maybe is under the radar a little bit, is a really important trade as well. Because Jeff Wilson obviously came from the Niners where he played for Mike McDaniel. And they've struggled to run the ball. Now, Tua has been outstanding, and that offense is really about as well schemed as any offense in the NFL right now. But they have not been able to run the ball with the consistency that I know Mike McDaniel would want. And I think the Wilson trade is an important trade as well.
Listen, we don't talk about money much with you, Greg, because the money is the money. I guess I've never thought of Chubb as being an elite player. You used the word good.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to describe him. It feels like giving up a first-round pick and paying him the money they are. It feels like, I don't know, I guess it kind of feels to me like the Dolphins think he's an elite player, and I'm not sure I've ever thought he was really an elite player or one of the best in the league at his spot.
Well, I guess the question there's two parts to that. It's what Chubb is, and I would agree with you. But the second part is different teams value draft choices differently. We've seen over the years there are some teams that do not want to part with any draft choices. And as soon as you say first-round pick or second-round pick, that ends any conversation because they want to hoard their draft choices. And there's certainly merit in that. There's no right or wrong here. And then there's other teams that might take the belief that, hey, a draft pick is a maybe. Chubb is a player who's played in the league. We have tape on him. We know what he is. He's a good player, and he can come in and help us right now. We don't know who we're going to be drafting in 2023. That guy could end up being a good player or not a good player. We know what Bradley Chubb is. So that's a question about value of draft choices, and teams view that differently, as you well know.
Good point. Really good point. What about Chase Claypool to the Chicago Bears? I found very interesting, Greg. Especially as a rookie, he made so many plays. He's clearly physically gifted, but it also seems like he was always spending time in Mike Tomlin's doghouse.
Yeah.
I don't know. What did you see on video from Claypool?
Yeah, I think Claypool, I remember him very well coming out of Notre Dame. And I based on his Notre Dame tape, I did not think he was a big-time prospect. Now, he went to the combine at 6'4", 238, Ross, and ran a 4.38. And you know how that works. When a player that size, particularly a receiver, runs with that kind of speed, automatically, in the eyes of many, that increases his draft value, and he became a second-round pick. That first year in Pittsburgh, he made some big explosive plays on vertical routes, and he was also used jet sweeps that way as well. It hasn't quite worked out the last couple of years. There could be many, many reasons for that, probably too many to get into right now. So the question is, how will he be deployed in an offense in Chicago that is trying to massage Justin Fields into being a quality NFL quarterback? So they're running the ball a lot. They're using Fields on a lot of design runs. They don't necessarily throw it a lot relative to other NFL teams. But now you've got two players who are vertical dimensions in Mooney and Claypool. So it'll be interesting to see, one, how they deploy them, and two, how defenses react to that. Because I don't think defenses right now, with the fact that the Bears don't throw it a lot and seemingly don't want to throw it a lot as Fields kind of develops incrementally, it'll be interesting to see if defenses say, wait a second, yeah, they don't throw it a lot, but the last thing that can happen is getting beat over the top. So I'm very curious to see how they deploy Claypool and Mooney, two guys that can, take the top off the defense.
What did you call them? Vertical what?
What did I say? Vertical dimensions? Did I say
vertical dimension? Yeah. Two guys that bring vertical dimension.
Yeah, that's what they are. I mean, both guys can run.
Let's talk Roquan Smith while we're talking Bears.
Yep.
To the Baltimore Ravens. We have the debate about off the ball linebackers a lot, and clearly, maybe in part because of their history, it's a position that the Ravens really value.
Yeah, and they have Patrick Queen, who's a good player, and they really have not been able to find that second, for want of a better term, stacked backer to go with Queen. And it's as you said, it is a position they value. So they made the trade. Now, obviously, Smith makes a lot of tackles. The big question, and I'm sure this is a debatable point amongst many different people, is Roquan Smith an impact off-the-ball player? Is he in the category of the Fred Warners in the league? I would argue, based on tape, he's not. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's that kind of player. I think he's, like I said, he's an upgrade for them without question, because they didn't really have one. They were playing the veteran journeyman who's, wherever he goes, he plays, Josh Bynes. But, yeah, obviously Roquan Smith is far better than Josh Bynes, but I'm just not sure Roquan Smith is that level of playmaker. Now, I bet that the Ravens know that, but he's still an upgrade for them. And as you said, that's an important position for them. And he will be used in multiple ways. He will be used as a blitzer. Maybe he'll become that kind of player depending on deployment, because he can blitz. He certainly tackles. We'll see. We'll see how he's used. But I think up to this point, his tape reflects a really solid player and a good player, but not one of those special impact off the ball backers.
Greg, let's get into some of these games this weekend. And let's start with tonight's game. I'm in Houston calling the Eagles and the Texans tonight. Obviously, the Eagles are really good. The Texans are really not. What will you be watching? What interests you about either team tonight?
Well, there's a lot that interests me because the Eagles are a fascinating team right now, Ross, as you well know. They're playing against a defense where there's not a lot of mystery. I mean, you're probably prepared to do the game tonight. It's a team that is in the Lovie Smith mold defensively. There's not a lot of mystery. It's a 4-man D-line pass rush. They play more zone than man. They do not play a lot of man coverage. They play a good amount of cover two. That's been a Lovie Smith staple for years. So this is not a defense that tactically presents a lot of problems. And you know as well as I do that if you're going to play a good amount of cover two, which they do, what do you need when you play cover two? You need a pass rush. They do not really have a pass rush at this point in time. And then the other factor, which will be interesting to see how the Eagles come out tonight, is the Texans do not stop the run very well. I believe they're last in the NFL in run defense. So I'm just uncertain as to how the Eagles will come out. It's easy to say they're going to come out running, but there's a part of me that thinks they're going to come out to try to get a big lead early because then they can just tee off with their D-line because they showed some things last week in terms of alignment and stunts that they had not shown up to this point this season, whether that's a function of Robert Quinn being there, whether they were going to do that anyway, we don't know, but they showed some different things. And if you get a big lead, it's the old way the Colts used to play. You get the big lead and then you rush the quarterback. And this is not a very good O-line either, with the exception of the left tackle Tunsil. So it would not surprise me to see the Eagles come out and be aggressive throwing the ball.
That's interesting, really, especially obviously after what we saw last week with Derrick Henry and the Titans running all over them.
Well, the Titans had no choice because of who they were playing at quarterback. And actually, that's the way the Titans play anyway, but the Eagles don't play that way.
Well, while we're on that, Greg, what do you think of the Titans in general and maybe in particular Malik Willis and what they did last week with him? We don't know whether or not he'll be playing against the Chiefs on Sunday night yet.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they're hoping against all hope that Tannehill plays because Malik Willis is not ready to play, and they pretty much had to hide him last week, and they could do that given the nature of the opponent. But even with Tannehill, they kind of have to play a certain way. They do not have a good receiving core. Their pass game is extremely limited. They're not going to come out and play even with Tannehill to get into a 38-35 game. They are going to have to run the ball, control the pace and tempo of the game, play to their defense. Their defense is very good, by the way, and hope that the game can be a 2017 game. And whether until they play, we don't know. But the point is they can't get into a game where they feel they have to throw the football, and they can't be aggressive throwing the ball. They're not good enough right now. So they're going to have to run the ball, and they've got some issues even with that. Obviously, Henry is always going to gain yards because he's a great back, and the Texans game last week kind of skewed everything because the Texans are not very good on defense. But this is a little different scenario here with what the Chiefs show up front. I mean, there's a left guard for the Titans who weighs 275 pounds, and he's going to be blocking Chris Jones and a very overlooked, really good run defender in Derek Nottie.
Yeah, boy, it's interesting to hear you talk about the Titans and then look and see what their record is. I mean, it's pretty impressive, actually.
Oh, no. I mean, they're a team, but they know what their strengths are and they know what their weaknesses / limitations are. And if their strengths can play at the absolute highest level against the Chiefs, they can stay in the game. But if it can't, they don't have anywhere else to go. That's the problem. They can really only win one way.
Well, they're doing some winning that way. What about the Dolphins and the Bears? I mean, especially the Dolphins, Greg. Some of these numbers now for Tua are really impressive. McDaniel's done a nice job with him.
He's done an unbelievable job. They motion more than any team in the league. And just so people understand, motion is when a player is moving at the snap. A shift is when a player moves and then resets before the snap. So they motion more than any team in the league. Okay, it's a major part of what they do. On motion plays, Tua is 60 for 80 for 718 yards. Think about that. 60 for 80 on motion throws, okay? So they motion, they play action, they ask second-level defenders to sort out a lot of things in a very brief amount of time, and that's why you get Hill and Waddle so wide open on those quick in-breakers between the numbers and between the hashes. By NFL standards, Ross, those are easy throws. Now, this is an unbelievable job by McDaniel. This is what the job of a coach is. People might think I'm saying, oh, Tua's not very good because they're easy throws. Tua's executing an incredibly well-schemed offense at a very high level, but the offense is presenting really easy throws by NFL standards. And as I'm going to repeat, that is the job of a coach, as you know. So their offense is really difficult to defend because it just grabs the eyes of second-level defenders in so many ways, and it really causes, I don't want to say confusion because they may not be confused, but just tentative, uncertain reactions. And that's how we constantly see Hill and Waddle wide open on those quick rhythm throws.
Yeah, I mean, by the time they figure out what's going on, you're not going to catch up to those guys.
No. And then they catch him in a void, and they have some room to run. So, a 9-yard pass or an 11-yard pass becomes a 25-yard gain.
Wow. I'm curious about the Vikings game against the Commanders, Greg. I think it's an intriguing game. The Commanders have won a few games now.
They're 4-4.
They're playing better with Heineke. Yeah, and obviously the Vikings have one of the best records in football.
And no one's talking about Minnesota at all, because you know how it is. There's perceptions out there, Ross, and there always are, and that's fine. Some perceptions have validity. Some are just thrown out there. So the perception is no matter what the Vikings do, that Kirk Cousins is the quarterback. So when you get to the playoffs, he's going to be bad. That's the perception. But right now, they have a very young, improving offensive line. I think it's a good group. I don't know what you think. I think it's a young, improving group. They clearly have a run game. Dalvin Cook is another player not talked about very much, a really high-level back. They've got a second back who's very good. They just got Hockenson. This is a you didn't ask me about that trade. I think Hockenson is a major trade here because they've got weapons. And Hockenson, I remember doing Hockenson coming out of Iowa, and he was one of the few players that I've ever done in the years and years I've been evaluating college players where I did not find a discernible weakness in his game coming out of Iowa. And obviously being in Detroit with the revolving door at quarterback until, and Goff's playing obviously better this year, but he just hasn't put up the numbers that the quote unquote elite tight ends put up. And he may not do that in Minnesota because they have Jefferson, but Hockenson is a really, really good player. And that's a major upgrade for them. So this is a very good offensive team. And defensively, they have a lot of length and athleticism along that front. They've got Hunter. They've got Za'Darius Smith. They've got DJ Wonnum. They move all these guys around. Smith, I believe, leads the NFL in sacks or close to it. And they line these guys up all over. They're tough to block. They're long. This is a pretty good football team. And again, who knows what the future holds? But, they're not talked about enough right now, in my view. And again, could they lose? Of course. But they're good.
Last game I want to ask you about is Monday Night Football, Greg. Ravens, who got Roquan, against the Saints, who really took it to the Raiders last week. What are you looking at in Monday Night Football?
Yeah, it'll be interesting offensively with the Ravens. Last week, they came out throwing the football. 31 dropbacks for Lamar in the first half alone. Very uncharacteristic of the way in which they normally play. He had 19 completions, but only for 144 yards. Now, Andrews, I guess, as we speak today, we don't know because he went out after 10 plays, and then they ended up playing more 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers than they had played in any game this season. So the question that I had was that a function of Andrews getting hurt, or was that a function of the opponent they played, the Bucs, who had 3 new people, non-starters, basically playing in their secondary? I guess we'll find out, or maybe we won't find out. But this is a team that I think will run the ball. The Saints D was really good this week, and the Saints D had been kind of a surprise in a negative way through much of the season because I think they're really well schemed, and I think they have good players. They've had a ton of injuries, and that's been a problem. But this is a really interesting game on that side of the ball because Dennis Allen's been doing this a long time in the league, and I'm curious to see how he goes about defending Lamar Jackson.
You got to check this man out on social. He's obviously excellent, and it's important that you know everywhere he's providing content, including the NFL Matchup Show on ESPN at Greg Cosell. Awesome stuff as always, Greg. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
You know what else is awesome? Diversifying your portfolio. Obviously, we know that what's going on right now is rough. S&P 500 down around 23%, mortgage rates through the roof. Bloomberg is predicting a 100% chance of a recession next year. Masterworks lets you invest in fine art from legends like Picasso and Banksy by breaking it into shares. Pretty cool, right? Like you can actually get a piece of some of these masterpieces without obviously having the money to buy the whole thing. As recently as October, Masterworks produced results, selling a painting for a 21.5% net return to their investors. In fact, 6 of their 7 exits have given investors more than 20% net returns. What does it mean? You put in 10K, you get out over 12K. Pretty good, right? Skip the wait list. There's a wait list. When you sign up and use special code Ross, that's masterworks.com, promo code Ross to skip the wait list. See important Regulation A disclosures at masterworks.com/CD.
Tuck's Takes.
Hey, Ross, good morning. There's huge news out of Washington. I think the first time there's news out of Washington that almost everybody in America can agree on. Daniel and Tanya Snyder engaged Bank of America to explore a possible sale of the Commanders franchise.
Unreal, right? I mean, just unreal. It feels like now that they couched it by saying exploring transactions, including potentially a minority sale, but this feels like it's happening. And I've talked about it before. I've never seen or am aware of a greater erosion of a fan base in professional sports than what I've seen in Washington over the last 20 years. And this would be absolutely gigantic news. And I think it'd be amazing for the NFL. I think it'd be amazing for the DC area. I mean, honestly, it would help the DC area if this happened. That's how bad it has been for the Snyder's ownership of the team he grew up a fan of. There's also a report that he is being investigated for financial improprieties, in terms of not hiding money so he didn't have to share it with the other owners. It's getting ugly.
Tuck's Takes.
Some very sad news. Longtime NFL coach Adam Zimmer passed away at the age of 38.
I did not know Adam well, but I definitely had met him, and I knew his dad really well because his dad was the D coordinator with the Cowboys, Mike, when I was there, and big fan of Mike as a person. Used to talk to him a lot before the games when I was doing games with you, Bri, for Sports USA Radio. They lost their mom, Mike's wife and Adam's mom, probably about 10 years ago now. And so that family's been through a lot. And I'm thinking about Mike's daughter and Mike himself and Mike's grandchildren. Just awful.
Tuck's Takes.
Some coaching firings. Lions fired their DB coach Aubrey Pleasant, and the Colts fired coordinator Marcus Brady.
You know what these guys could go for right about now? A Labatt Blue Light. Because football season means Labatt Blue Light season. Labatt Blue Light is delicious. It's a light beer that actually has flavor. That's the key. There's no better way to watch your team on game day than with the pristine, Canadian goodness of a cold Labatt Blue Light in hand. I don't know why their beer tastes colder, but it does. It's delicious. And actually, like I said, is a light beer with significant flavor. Stock up, be the MVP of your tailgate. Share a Labatt on game day with your crew. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. And I feel like, both Aubrey Pleasant and Marcus Brady could use multiple Labatt Blue Lights. One of my least favorite things about the NFL is the sacrificial lambs that they have with assistant coaches to try to appease the media. I already had somebody tell me that the Lions firing DB coach Aubrey Pleasant was an ownership decision, not even a Dan Campbell decision. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but somebody that might know told me that, right? I know this much. I think you're either just trying to appease the media, typically, or you are trying to light a fire under the rest of the team and coaching staff and sort of put them on notice that, hey, people are getting fired. If everybody doesn't pick it up, you might be next. That's essentially what these moves are. I mean, Pleasant's not the D coordinator. He's the DB coach. So obviously they think that those guys are underperforming, but who's going to take over that position, right? And then Marcus Brady for the Colts doesn't even call the plays anyway. So why are you firing Marcus Brady? It's rough. It's rough out here for position coaches.
Tuck's Takes.
Couple of transactions, including the Eagles placing D tackle Jordan Davis on IR. The Cardinals signed linebacker Kamu Gouget-Hill and claimed D tackle Tristan Hill.
Right. And I mentioned this earlier. I'll mention it again. Bradley Chubb, 5 years, $119 million with $63.2 million guaranteed. Good for Bradley, man. I mean, you're talking about a guy that tore an ACL and missed a bunch of time. He had a foot surgery and missed a bunch of time. That's the other thing that surprises me a little bit with how much the Dolphins were willing to invest in him. That's a young man that's had some major injuries during his career. So as they say, we shall see what happens there with Bradley. Greg made sense, though. Look, they're trying to go for it this year. I talked about this the other day. Eagles placing Jordan Davis on IR is interesting because if you're the Texans, then you probably want to try to run the ball. They're lighter along the D-line now. They don't have as much depth. They lost maybe their best run stuffer already in Jordan Davis. That's a big loss. He's out at least 4 weeks. For the Cardinals, they get Gouget-Hill, who had asked for his release from the Texans and gotten it, and Tristan Hill, who the Cowboys tried to trade, but there were no takers, so they ultimately cut him.
Tuck's Takes.
And finally, we've got a game tonight. Philly and Houston. Actually, 2 Philly-Houston games tonight. You'll be doing the NFL version. Do the Texans have any chance in this one?
By the way, I was on the plane coming out here last night for the no-hitter. That was not fun. Not fun at all to be on that plane and they don't get one hit. And I watched it. I watched the whole game. I will say I'll be watching tonight's whole game too. Eagles-Texans right now on the Game Time app. This is what's amazing. $26. Like you can go to an NFL game and watch the best team in the NFL maybe, or at least number one in my power rankings for $26. And actually, you could go for $6 because if you download the Game Time app, create an account, and redeem code Ross for $20 off your first purchase, you get in for $6. NFL game primetime tonight. See your boy Ross. That's me. I mean, there's a reason why it's the fastest growing ticketing app. Primarily, I think, because it guarantees the lowest prices. But I love being able to put in different cities like when I'm in Houston now, see what they got. Download Game Time. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The code's Ross to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. As for the game, Bri, I mean, turnovers in football are the great equalizer. So that, I suppose, is the Texans' chance. Watching both these teams on video this week to prepare for the game tonight, it's hard to see it. I mean, maybe they can fool the Eagles and hit a deep ball to like Brandon Cooks. That would certainly help. If he plays, he's listed on the injury report with a wrist injury ever since he didn't get traded. I don't know what that means. They're going to try to run the ball, I think, with Damian Pierce, shorten the game, see if they can pound away at the Eagles without Jordan Davis and with less D tackles to play. But really, it's turnovers. I mean, the Texans have to be +2 in the turnover margin, in my mind, to really have any chance to win this game. It's hard to envision a scenario whereby they win if that's not the case. To be honest with you, I think it's probably like 27-10 Eagles. I don't know. Maybe 23-10 Eagles. I think they probably win by a decent amount. Shout outs, as always, to Pizza Boy Brewing, Sporticulture, HumanHeadNYC.com, SteakhouseSports.com, Go-Bangles.com, Evergreen Economics, Vision Comics with an X, BackOfficeScheduler.com, and the gift that keeps on giving for your loved ones forever, MyFrontPageStory.com. I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, RossTucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.